Let's bring in right now to the conversation from Semafor, Eleanor Mueller. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Let's first talk about the shutdown that came to a close yesterday. It was the Senate over the weekend pushing it to the House. The House made it through. What type of coalition from the GOP did it take to make this historic shutdown come to an end?
We saw a remarkable degree of unity from the GOP in last night's vote. There was some last minute infighting over a Senate provision that would allow some senators to sue the Justice Department for accessing their phone records while it was investigating January 6th. We saw several conservatives, other members of the House Republican Conference raising concerns about really just the appearance of serving. And so we saw one of them, Congressman Stubbe, eventually end up voting no. But Johnson, House Speaker Mike Johnson, promised a vote next week on a bill that would repeal provision, and that seemed to be enough. Every single other House Republican, except for Thomas Massie, who is almost always a no vote, wound up voting to advance this package. So a big, big win for the House Republicans.
And we were seeing from President Trump there, that was him signing it last night, late last night, with plenty of Republican support behind him. Obviously, they're calling this a win. We're hearing from different Democratic senators saying it's betrayal, pathetic in terms of this. In terms of maybe winners and losers from the shutdown, GOP is claiming this as a victory, right?
They are, and they should. I mean, this is the deal that Republicans put on the table several weeks ago. Democrats at the time said it wasn't good enough. They've since won some concessions, protections for federal workers. That was a big one that I know Senate Democrats said they were surprised their colleagues were able to win. And of course, again, this vote that we've been talking about for a month, next month on extending enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies. So not nothing, but definitely not a lot for the Republican Party to be giving up, and especially House Republicans. I mean, Johnson said repeatedly this week that he has not committed to a vote. He will not commit to a vote until he can build consensus in his party. And so they've really not put themselves out at all here.
Yeah, potentially steamrolling their way to this, and just a vote or even a conversation about it doesn't feel like, obviously the Democrats and some Democrats echoing that they don't feel like this was enough to end that shutdown. I do want to ask you though, because we saw the swearing in Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva. She immediately gets sworn after 50 days, not after her special election. And then she immediately joins those 217 other, now 218 people on the discharge petition around Jeffery Epstein. What do we make of this? Because there's a vote next week. We thought it might be pushed off, but now it's right at the forefront, isn't it?
It is. So, yeah, Congresswoman Grijalva was sworn in by Speaker Johnson yesterday. He said all along he would swear her in the first day that the House was back in session. That's what he did. She immediately then became the last signature needed to force a vote on a bill that would require the Justice Department to release all of its files on Epstein. So not just what they've been doing, including as part of the House oversight effort, which is kind of being able to filter what they're putting out there. Instead, right, they'd have to put out everything that they have. Congressman Burchett suggested just doing a voice vote on the bill last night. Thomas Massie, who is one of the supporters of the discharge petition, said he saw that as kind of a cop-out. He said that would avoid the reason that they've been doing this, which is to put so many of these Republican lawmakers on the record about the files. And then Speaker Johnson said shortly after that actually he would just go ahead and schedule a real vote next week. And so instead of waiting for, I think it's 7 legislative days and then 2 legislative days after that, the way the discharge petition typically requires, Johnson said, hey, I'll do this right away and it'll get a vote next week.
And it's interesting how malleable they kind of are in terms of things like this versus what we saw with Grijalva. I do want to ask you, because we saw pressure from the Trump administration on different Republicans that signed onto this discharge, including Nancy Mace, obviously, and Paulina Luna, but also notably Lauren Boebert, the Republican from Colorado. How much pressure is on some of these individuals, and what exactly is the Trump administration doing?
I think a great deal of pressure. I mean, I've seen the same reporting you have. It sounds like he's made several calls to specifically Congresswoman Mace, Congresswoman Boebert. Congresswoman Boebert in particular was very guarded about those interactions last night. I, among others, spoke to her. She kind of wanted to keep the emphasis on her and the administration's shared commitment to transparency, is how she put it. But I mean, Congressman Thomas Massie seems to think that, one, not only will several more House Republicans end up voting for this bill when it gets to the House next week, but if by some slim chance it does make it through the Senate and it does make it to Trump's desk, that the president would end up signing it. You know, he said it's one thing to privately try and maneuver to keep this from getting more airtime than it already has. And it's another thing to proactively block it. And so we'll see whether he's right. I think he is certainly right about the fact that many more Republicans will be voting for this next week than signed that discharge petition.
And I want to ask you about any other tactics, because we heard from the White House press secretary saying what is discussed in the Situation Room not going to be necessarily discussed in the press briefing room. Are there any other tactics out there? You said if it gets to his desk, it might not be that easy for him to not sign it. Is there anything else the Trump administration can do?
I mean, they can talk to senators about not taking this up. You know, I think that the Republicans in the House who are supportive of this effort had said last night they've spoken to Senate Democrats. The Trump administration is more than able to go to Senate Republicans and say, hey, not only do we not want you to support this thing, to talk about this thing, but to leaders, we don't want you to make floor time for it. And that's something that Senate Majority Leader John Thune is certainly within his right to do.
That is a very good point. All right, those are the two main topics, but obviously somewhat back to normal there on Capitol Hill. What else are we looking at? What else is on the docket for you of importance?
There's a lot. So they've been out for 50 plus days. Johnson has said repeatedly, privately over the last several weeks, and then publicly yesterday that there's going to be a lot of long nights, long days for the House when they get back for good next Monday. One of the things that we're tracking is legislation that would prevent lawmakers from trading as stocks while they're in office. We've been told that there's going to be a committee hearing. Initially, members thought it would be a markup, a committee vote. That no longer seems like it'll be the case, but certainly some movement there. And that'll be a tough one for lawmakers who've expressed concern that, it could make it less affordable for members to serve in Congress. Now, of course, there are some conversations over the validity of that argument, but that's the concern that's been raised. And then there's other conversations, including over what would go into must pass defense legislation that's going to get a vote at the end of the year. Talks about whether to repeal Syria sanctions, which some members have questions about, talks about whether to include restrictions on investments in China. So lots and lots of talks, lots of various topics across every single committee that they're going to be really crashing to get through here.
Yeah, and obviously we'll see what we get through before the conversation turns back to another shutdown in January. We'll see if it's Groundhog's Day again. What's the likelihood? What are we hearing about that? Because obviously January, the end of January, is a key date for some appropriations.
Yeah. So this deal, I mean, it included 3 full-year appropriations bills. And so certain agencies are set until the end of this fiscal year. Every other funding level was extended through January 30th. So come January 30th, we're going to be having potentially this conversation all over again. Democrats are going to get that vote in December on enhanced healthcare tax credits. What we've heard in the last week from Republicans on the Hill is that it's highly unlikely a bipartisan product with legs will be negotiated by then. And so Democrats might get a vote on their bill. I think Senator Marshall said earlier this week that Republicans could put their party's own bill on the floor at the same time. But whether or not it's a bill that both parties like that will move from there seems highly unlikely. And so unless we see a real miracle here, I think it's likely we'll be having the same conversation over healthcare and government funding in January.
It's deja vu all over again, but we'll take some solace that the government shutdown came to an end this time. We'll get that for another day, potentially another year next year. All right, Eleanor, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Your insight is always so valuable here on Live Now.